David had always believed that a man's home should be his place of rest. When he first saw the house by the lake, he felt something stir inside him. It was not just the wooden walls or the open porch that drew him in. It was the water itself. The lake stretched out behind the property like a sheet of glass, catching every color of the sky above. At sunrise, it glowed with soft gold. At sunset, it burned with fire. And at night, the moon spread silver paths across the ripples. David bought the house with careful planning. He had worked many years saving every bit he could. He did not want only a house. He wanted land. He wanted space where he would not be pressed by neighbors or rules. The papers he signed gave him not only the house and yard, but also the entire lake. He felt proud of that. He told himself this lake was not just water. It was freedom. During the first weeks after moving in, David spent hours walking around the shore. He placed a wooden bench beneath a willow tree where he could sit and watch the reflections. He built a small dock with his own hands, hammering nails late into the evening. He bought a rowboat and painted it bright red. Sometimes he would row to the middle of the lake and let the boat drift, listening only to the call of birds. For him, it was paradise. David liked to share this paradise. On weekends, he invited friends, cousins, and sometimes co-workers. Families came with children who ran toward the water with wide eyes. Some brought fishing poles. Some brought baskets of food. Laughter filled the air as they splashed, swam, or rested under the trees. In the evenings, they sat together on the dock, telling stories as the fireflies blinked in the bushes. But in the background of this piece, there was one shadow that always seemed to appear. Her name was Karen. Karen was not just any neighbor. She was a leader in the HOA, the homeowners association that managed rules for the community. She loved rules, but even more, she loved giving orders. If someone planted flowers that were too bright, she sent a notice. If a basketball hoop was left near the street, she complained. Many neighbors disliked her strict ways, but few dared to speak against her. David had noticed her early on. She lived only a few houses away. From the first week, she came to his door with a thick folder of HOA papers. She smiled, but the smile carried no warmth. She pointed to rules about fences, lawns, and exterior colors. David listened politely, but he felt a stone settle in his stomach. One page caught his eye. It spoke of community property, areas shared by all residents. There was a park, a pool, and a small playground. But nowhere on that list was the lake. David asked about it. Karen brushed off the question. Everyone treats the lake as part of the neighborhood, she said. So naturally, the same rules apply. David said nothing that day. He had already checked his deed. He knew the truth. The lake belonged to him, not to the HOA. Still, he chose silence. He thought perhaps if he stayed calm, there would be no trouble. But trouble often comes to those who hold peace too quietly. The first clash came one Saturday morning in early summer. David's cousins had arrived with their children. The air smelled of fresh grass and the sun shone warm but not too hot. The little ones rushed to the water, their shouts ringing through the air. Two boys climbed into the rowboat while their father pushed them off the dock. A girl knelt at the shore searching for shiny stones. The older folks spread blankets under the willow tree, setting down baskets of food. David stood on the dock, tying the rope of a second boat he had borrowed for the day. His cousin Paul walked up beside him. "You really have a gem here," Paul said. "The kids never want to leave," David smiled. "That's the point. I wanted a place where family can gather and feel free." Just then, the sound of firm steps came down the path. David did not need to turn to know who it was. The sharp click of sandals, the brisk pace, the rustling of papers in hand. It was Karen. She came into view, arms crossed, eyes narrowed at the sight of children splashing. "What is happening here?" she demanded. David kept his calm. "It is a family gathering," he answered. Karen's gaze swept over the people on the blankets, the children in the boats, the food spread out under the tree. Her lips pressed together in disapproval. "This is against HOA policy," she declared. "Guests are not allowed to use the lake. It is for residents only." The laughter of children fell silent. Paul looked at David, puzzled. The girl by the shore pulled her hand from the water. The boys in the boat froze, their oars hanging still. David turned fully to face Karen. His voice remained steady. "This lake is not part of the HOA. It is my land. These are my guests. They have every right to be here." Karen blinked as if she had not heard correctly. "That is not possible. The lake is part of the neighborhood." Everyone knows that. David reached into his bag and pulled out a plastic folder. He carried it often, not because he liked arguments, but because he liked facts. Inside were the property maps and the deed to the house. He held it out to her. "Look here," he said. "The line of my property covers the entire lake. I own it in full." Karen's face changed. The certainty in her eyes wavered. She took the papers with stiff hands, scanning them quickly. The black lines of the map clearly surrounded the lake. The deed bore his name, signed and sealed. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. This cannot be right," she whispered. David stood firm. "It is right. I checked with the county before I bought the land. I checked again last year when you first brought me those HOA rules. The lake is not community property. It belongs only to this house." Behind them, the children whispered. The adults leaned closer, watching. No one spoke louder than a murmur, yet everyone's eyes stayed on the scene. Karen's shoulders stiffened. "Well," she said at last, her voice rising, "even if it is your land, you should follow neighborhood standards. Too many guests bring noise and mess. It affects everyone's peace." David gave a small smile, but his words carried weight. "Karen, peace is not made by taking joy from others. Peace is made by respecting what belongs to them." The silence grew heavy. Even the birds seemed to pause in the trees. Karen held the folder one moment longer before pushing it back into his hands. She turned sharply, her sandals striking the path as she walked away. David exhaled slowly. He felt the tension leave his chest. He turned to the children and raised his hand. "Go on," he called. "Enjoy the water." The boys laughed again, rowing the boat with fresh strength. The girl bent back to search for stones. The adults returned to their food, though they still exchanged curious glances. Paul clapped David on the shoulder. "I see now why you kept those papers ready," he said. David nodded. "Some neighbors like rules too much, but truth is stronger than rules." As the afternoon passed, laughter once more filled the air. Yet in the back of David's mind, a thought remained. This was not the end. Karen was not a woman to accept defeat easily. She had been challenged in front of others, and she would not forget. David looked out across the lake. The sun glimmered on the water as if nothing had happened. But he knew better. This peaceful lake was more than a gift. It was also a shield. And sooner or later, he would have to guard it again. The summer sun rose bright the following weekend, and the lake sparkled like a jewel once again. David stood on the dock early in the morning, holding a mug of coffee in his hand. He breathed deeply, letting the cool air fill his chest. For him, mornings by the water were the purest form of calm. The surface was still, touched only by the wings of birds skimming across it. The world seemed fresh, as though no problem could touch him here. But David knew better. He knew Karen would not forget what had happened. She had left in silence, but silence from her did not mean surrender. It meant she was planning. David had seen enough of her ways to understand. She was the type who lived to prove herself right. As the clock moved closer to noon, David's friends began arriving again. His neighbor Sam, a quiet man who lived down the road, walked over with his fishing gear. Sam was a good friend, steady and calm. He had known Karen for years and often rolled his eyes when her name came up. "You think she'll be back?" Sam asked, lowering his fishing pole into the water. David nodded slowly. "Yes, she doesn't let go of things. She'll return, but this time I'll be ready." Sam chuckled. "You were ready last time, too. The way she looked when you showed her those papers, I almost felt sorry for her." "Almost." David smiled faintly, but his eyes stayed on the path leading to his yard. It was quiet now, but he expected that quiet would not last. By afternoon, the dock was full again. Children ran up and down, splashing each other. Families sat on blankets, sharing sandwiches and cold drinks. David rowed a boat with two young boys who laughed so hard they nearly tipped into the water. It was joy, pure and full. Then came the sound he had been waiting for. Footsteps quick and firm pushing through the grass. Karen had returned. She appeared dressed in a bright blouse and holding a clipboard. Behind her walked two other HOA members, a tall man named Martin and a woman named Linda. Both carried serious expressions, but their steps were slower than Karen's sharp march. Karen stopped near the dock, her hands on her hips. Her voice rang out clearly. "This must stop at once." The children paused again, remembering her tone from last week. The laughter faded. Parents looked up, uneasy. Sam muttered something under his breath and shook his head. David turned his boat back toward the dock and helped the boys climb out. He faced Karen with calm eyes. Karen, you are welcome to visit if you want to enjoy the day. But if you are here to argue, you should save your breath. Karen's eyes narrowed. I have spoken with the board. We reviewed the matter. Even if the lake falls on your deed, it still affects the neighborhood. The noise, the traffic, the disturbance, it all falls under HOA authority. We will not allow this misuse. David crossed his arms. Misuse? This is my family enjoying my land. That is not misuse. That is life. Martin cleared his throat. We do not want conflict, David. But you must understand that rules are rules. The HOA exists to maintain harmony. Linda spoke softly. Perhaps if you limited the number of guests. David shook his head. No, this lake is not part of the HOA. You cannot set limits here. You may have authority over fences and lawns, but not over this water. I will not bow to rules that do not apply. Karen's face reddened. You think you can ignore the association? You think you can hide behind a piece of paper? This community will not tolerate selfishness. David took a step closer, his voice still calm but firm. Selfishness is not sharing your land with friends. Selfishness is trying to take what is not yours. The crowd of family and neighbors had grown silent, watching the standoff. Even the children seemed to hold their breath. At last, Sam stood and spoke. Karen, enough. I've lived here 10 years. We all know this lake has always belonged to this house. No one else ever maintained it. No one else built the dock or cleared the shore. It's his. Stop acting like it belongs to you. Several others nodded in agreement. David's cousins added their voices. We are guests, but we bring no harm. We clean up after ourselves. We respect the land. The words pressed against Karen like waves against a stone wall. She opened her mouth, but for once she had no sharp reply. Her eyes darted from face to face as though she could not believe people were taking David's side. Finally, she snapped her clipboard shut. This is not over, she declared. You will hear from us soon. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back down the path. Martin and Linda followed, though more slowly, their faces troubled. The moment she disappeared, laughter and voices returned. The spell of tension broke. Children rushed back into the water, shouting with joy. Adults shook their heads and muttered relief. David, however, did not smile. He knew this was only the second round. Karen was wounded in pride, and pride was a dangerous thing. She would search for another way to strike. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the lake glowed with red light, David sat on the bench beneath the willow tree. Sam joined him, holding a cup of tea. She won't stop, David said quietly. No, Sam agreed. But you've got the truth on your side. Papers, law, and common sense. She may fight, but she can't win. David watched the water, thinking, she doesn't care about truth. She cares about power, and when people care more about power than truth, they can still make life hard. Sam nodded slowly. Then you'll have to be tougher than her. The crickets began to sing as night settled. Fireflies danced above the grass. The lake reflected the moon like a mirror. It was peaceful again, but David felt the weight of coming storms. The next week proved him right. Letters began arriving in his mailbox, not from the county or the law, but from the HOA. One demanded that he limit guest numbers. Another claimed that large gatherings created parking issues. A third accused him of disturbing the neighborhood atmosphere. Each was signed by Karen as head of the compliance committee. David kept each letter, stacking them neatly in a folder. He did not respond. He did not argue. He simply prepared. On Friday evening, Sam came over again. You going to answer those? He asked. David shook his head. Not yet. If they try to find me, I'll answer with the deed. If they push harder, I'll answer with the county records. The truth is simple. The lake is mine. They cannot take it, no matter how many letters they write. Sam smiled. I almost want to see her face when she realizes she's lost for good. David leaned back in his chair. She won't accept loss. She will keep pushing until she breaks. And when that happens, it will not just be about me. It will be about the whole neighborhood seeing who she really is. That weekend, David invited his family again. More neighbors came too, curious about the drama. The lake became a place not only of joy, but of quiet rebellion. People who had stayed silent against Karen before now began to speak up. They brought food, shared laughter, and stood by David. Karen stayed away that time, but everyone knew she was watching. From her porch across the street, her eyes followed every car that parked, every child that ran toward the water. Her face was a mask of disapproval. The lake had become more than a lake. It had become a line drawn in the sand, David sat on the dock that night, the stars shining above him. He listened to the gentle lap of water and thought of what was coming. He did not fear Karen, but he did not underestimate her either. This was only the beginning. The morning sun stretched golden lines across the lake. David stood on the dock with a fishing rod in his hands, though his thoughts were far from the quiet water. Each cast of the line felt like a way to calm his mind, but peace did not come easily. The letters from the HOA still sat in his folder inside the house. One after another they had arrived, each written in the same sharp tone, each signed by Karen. At first David had felt annoyance. Then he had felt anger. Now he only felt a strange mix of determination and weariness. He knew this fight was not just about the lake anymore. It was about control. Karen wanted to prove that her word was law in the neighborhood. And David could not allow her to succeed because if he gave in, it would not stop with the lake. His friend Sam came down the path with his usual slow steps, carrying a small bucket of bait. He waved. "Thought I'd find you here," Sam said. David gave a small smile. "Where else would I be?" Sam joined him on the dock, setting down his bucket. He cast his line into the water and sighed. "So what now? More letters?" David nodded. 3 this week. One even threatened to fine me if I continued allowing guests. Sam shook his head. "She knows she can't fine you for something outside HOA property." "True," David replied, "but she counts on people being too tired or too scared to fight. Most people pay just to make the problem go away." Sam leaned on his rod. "But you're not most people." "No," David said softly. "I'm not." Later that day, David decided it was time to speak directly to the board. Not in anger, but in clarity. He gathered his papers again, placed them neatly in a folder, and walked to the community office where the HOA held meetings. Inside, he found Karen already waiting with 2 other board members. She greeted him with a cold smile. "David, how nice of you to finally respond." David kept his voice even. "I am here because the letters you send have no legal ground. This lake is my private land. You have no right to demand limits on my guests or gatherings." Karen lifted her chin. "We act for the good of the community. Your gatherings bring too many cars, too much noise, too much disruption. Rules must apply." David opened his folder and placed the map and deed on the table. "Rules apply only where they are meant to apply. You know the lake is mine. You know the HOA has no authority over it." The tall man on the board, Martin, cleared his throat. "Karen, the documents are clear. The lake is not listed as community property." Karen turned on him sharply. "That does not matter. It still affects the neighborhood." Linda, the other member, spoke softly. "But we cannot enforce what does not belong to us." The room grew tense. Karen's lips pressed together in a tight line. She looked at David with eyes that seemed to burn. "You may win this argument with papers, but you will not win the hearts of this community. People are tired of your parties. They will side with me in the end." David gathered his papers calmly. "We will see." He left the office with a steady pace, though inside he felt the weight of her words. He knew Karen would not give up. She would try other ways, perhaps whispering to neighbors, perhaps spreading stories, and soon enough her whispers began. Over the next week, David noticed changes. Some neighbors who had once waved now avoided eye contact. A few cars drove past slower than usual, their drivers staring at the lake. Rumors began to reach him through Sam and others. Karen was telling people that his guests were leaving trash, damaging the shore, even scaring wildlife. None of it was true, but lies often traveled faster than truth. One evening, David's cousin Paul called him. "I heard from someone that the HOA is trying to paint you as careless," Paul said. "They say you're destroying the lake," David sighed. "That lake is cleaner now than when I bought it. I take care of it every day." "I know," Paul replied, "but you need to show others too. If she spreads lies, you need to show the truth." The idea stayed with David. The next morning he began working. He cleaned the shore more carefully than before, collecting even the smallest fallen branch. He placed extra trash bins around the dock. He built a sign asking guests to respect the land and keep it clean. Every action was proof of his care. Neighbors began noticing. Some who had doubted started to see with their own eyes that the lake remained spotless. Children laughed, but they also followed the rules David set. Adults respected the place, leaving it cleaner than when they arrived. Sam told him one afternoon, "You're turning her lies into nothing. People can see the truth with their own eyes." David nodded. "It will take time. But truth always shines through if you stay steady. But Karen was not finished. One Saturday, when the lake was once again alive with laughter, Karen arrived with a police officer by her side. The sight made everyone pause. Parents pulled children close. Voices hushed. David walked calmly to the dock where Karen stood, her face triumphant. "Officer," she said loudly, "this man is disturbing the peace with unauthorized gatherings. He must shut this down." The officer looked around, then turned to David. "Sir, may I speak with you?" David nodded. Together they stepped aside. The officer spoke quietly. "We received a call about disturbance, but I see families enjoying themselves." "Can you explain?" David handed him the folder he always carried. "This is my property. The lake is mine. These are my guests. We follow the law, we leave no mess, we disturb no one beyond the complaints of this one neighbor." The officer studied the papers carefully. After a long moment, he closed the folder and returned it. "Everything here seems in order," he said. Then he turned to Karen. "Ma'am, this is private property. Unless there is real evidence of harm, we have no reason to act." Karen's face turned pale with anger. But the noise." "The cars." The officer shook his head. "Families on private land are not breaking any law. Please do not waste police time again." With that, he tipped his hat and left. The moment was powerful. Everyone around the lake had witnessed it. Karen had tried to use the law, and the law itself had turned her away. Cheers rose from the children. Adults clapped David on the back. Even those who had doubted before now saw the truth clear as daylight. Karen, trembling with fury, spun on her heel and marched away without another word. That evening, as the last guest left, Sam sat with David on the porch. The crickets sang again and the moon rose over the calm water. "She's running out of weapons," Sam said. "She tried letters. She tried whispers. Now she even tried the police. None of it worked." David nodded. "But she's not finished yet. Pride like hers does not fade easily." Sam looked out over the lake. "Then we'll be ready when she strikes again." David leaned back in his chair, eyes on the stars. The fight was not over, but he felt stronger now. The lake was not just his home. It had become a place where truth was tested and proven. And he was ready for whatever came next. The weeks passed and the lake continued to shine as the heart of David's home. Families came, children laughed, and the water reflected peace. Yet beneath that peace, pressure grew like a storm waiting on the horizon. Karen had lost her battles in front of the board, in front of neighbors, and even in front of the police. Each loss deepened her frustration. David knew this. Every time he saw her car pass slowly down the street, every time he noticed her watching from her porch, he could feel her anger. But he also felt something else, her determination. She was not the type to surrender. He understood that one last attempt would come, and it would be stronger than the rest. One afternoon, as David repaired a loose plank on the dock, Sam walked over with his usual slow steps. He carried a small bag of tools and set them down beside David. "Need a hand?" Sam asked. David smiled, always. "These boards keep loosening with all the running children." Together they worked, the sound of hammering blending with the calls of birds. After a while, Sam leaned on his hammer and spoke in a lower voice. "I heard something. Karen is gathering signatures." David paused. "Signatures for what?" "She wants to call a special HOA meeting," Sam explained. "She is pushing for a rule that will directly target you. Something about limiting events on private land if they affect the community." David shook his head slowly. "She knows she cannot control my land, but she wants to twist words, make people think rules can stretch further than they truly do." Sam nodded. "Exactly. She tells people it's about fairness, about protecting peace. But we both know it's about her pride." David sighed. "Then I must be ready again. I cannot let her rewrite the truth." Days later, the letter arrived. It was an announcement from the HOA signed by Karen, calling for a meeting of all residents. The subject was written in bold words: discussion of events and gatherings impacting neighborhood quality. David read the letter twice. The meaning was clear. It was aimed at him. The night of the meeting arrived. The community hall filled with people more than usual. The air buzzed with quiet voices, with whispers and guesses. Some looked curious, others looked tired, but all waited to see what would unfold. David entered calmly, carrying his folder as always. Sam walked beside him, nodding at familiar faces. When they sat, heads turned. People wanted to see how the man at the center of the storm would act. At the front, Karen stood tall, papers in hand. Her voice rang across the room. We are gathered to discuss an important issue. Many residents have expressed concern about constant noise, traffic, and gatherings around the lake. This is not in the spirit of our neighborhood. A murmur ran through the crowd. Some nodded, others frowned. Karen continued. We propose a new rule that limits large gatherings on private property when they disturb the harmony of others. This is not about one person, but about all of us. Her eyes, however, landed firmly on David as she spoke. When she finished, she opened the floor. Would anyone like to speak? Before anyone else could rise, David stood. His voice was steady, clear enough to reach every corner. Yes, I would like to speak. The room quieted. All eyes turned to him. David held up his folder. This lake is my land. I bought it with care. I maintain it with my own hands. Every guest who visits respects it. We leave no mess, no damage. Children laugh, families rest, and peace fills the air. That is not disturbance. That is life. He placed the property map on the table at the front. This map shows what belongs to me. The HOA rules stop at my fence line. You cannot stretch them further just because one person dislikes joy. A woman in the crowd stood. But Karen said cars block the street. David turned to her. Every car that comes parks in my driveway or on my land. Not once has a road been blocked. Look with your own eyes before believing words. A man raised his hand. Karen said there is trash by the water. David shook his head. Walk there any morning. You will see a shore cleaner than any park. I built bins. I remind guests. We respect the land. Sam stood as well. His voice carried weight. I have lived here 10 years. I fish at that lake. I see how David cares for it. He does more for this place than anyone else. Karen's stories are not truth. They are pride. The room filled with whispers. Some nodded in agreement, others looked uncertain. But the balance had shifted. The silence of many was breaking. Karen's face grew red. Do not be fooled, she cried. This is about fairness. Today it is him. Tomorrow it could be someone else. Rules protect us all. David raised his hand gently. Rules are good when they protect what is shared. But rules that steal from what is private are not protection. They are control. And control is not harmony. His words settled heavily. The crowd murmured again, softer now, thoughtful. Finally, Martin spoke from the board's table. The HOA cannot extend rules onto private property. That has always been the law. This proposal overreaches, Linda nodded. I agree. We cannot support this. Karen turned to them, shock flashing across her face. You cannot betray me like this. But Martin only shook his head. We are not betraying you. We are following truth. The vote was called. Hands rose around the room. The majority sided against Karen's proposal. The motion failed. For a long moment, silence filled the hall. Then voices rose, calm but firm. Neighbors thanked David for speaking clearly. Some apologized for doubting. Even those who had been quiet before now seemed willing to stand with him. Karen sat stiffly, her papers clutched in her hands. Her eyes stared forward, but her face burned with defeat. When the meeting ended, David walked out with Sam beside him. The night air felt cool, the stars bright. Sam chuckled softly. You ended it tonight. She cannot push further after this. David shook his head. She will not admit defeat. But the truth is no longer mine alone. The neighbors saw it. They chose it. That changes everything. Back at the lake, David stood on the dock once more. The moon cast a silver path across the water. He breathed deeply, feeling both tired and strong. The fight had been long, and perhaps it was not yet fully over, but something had shifted. The community had seen with their own eyes. Karen's power had cracked. David looked at the water and whispered, This lake is mine, but tonight it became more. It became a stand for truth. And though he knew Karen still burned with anger, he felt ready for whatever final test might come. The summer rolled on, warm and golden, with long days that made the lake sparkle like glass. Families continued to visit, children splashed in the water, and laughter echoed across the shore. For David, life felt lighter now. The storm that had shaken the community seemed to fade, and the support he had gained gave him new peace. But peace, he knew, never lasted long when Karen was nearby. She had lost the board meeting, and the vote had cut away her strongest weapon. Neighbors no longer believed every word she spoke, and many had begun to keep their distance from her. Still, Karen was not one to step quietly into the background. She was determined to win in her own way, no matter how much effort it required. One morning, Sam came walking down the path to the dock. where David was mending a fishing net. The old man leaned on his cane and looked serious. "I heard something," Sam said. David glanced up. "About Karen?" Sam nodded. "She's been meeting with people outside the neighborhood. She went to the county office, asked about zoning, land use, water rights. She is trying to find another path." David sighed deeply. "I knew she would not stop. She cannot accept that this land is mine." "She won't find much," Sam said. "But she will try until she has nothing left." David nodded slowly. "Then I will stand ready. Whatever she brings, I will answer with truth." That week, letters began to arrive at David's home. They were not from the HOA this time, but from county offices. Each letter contained questions, inspections, or claims filed by Karen. She questioned whether the dock was legal, whether gatherings by the lake required permits, even whether the water was safe for swimming. David read each letter carefully. He knew these were not random checks. They were Karen's final weapons. She wanted to use the law itself against him. Rather than panic, David prepared. He gathered every document: the land deed, the permits for the dock, water test results, even letters of approval from when he first purchased the property. He placed them in order inside his folder. When the county inspector arrived, David greeted him warmly. He walked the man through every part of the property, showing the bins for trash, the maintained dock, the clean water. The inspector nodded with approval. "Everything here is in good condition," the inspector said. "Your permits are valid and the water is safe. Whoever sent these complaints gave us no real cause." David smiled. "Thank you for checking. I respect the rules, but I also respect truth." The inspector shook his hand. "You have nothing to fear." But Karen did not stop there. She filed more complaints, each weaker than the last, hoping one might succeed. Each time officials came, checked, and left with the same conclusion. David's land was his and nothing was wrong. The community began to notice. Neighbors saw inspectors visiting again and again, only to leave with satisfied nods. They began to whisper among themselves. Some grew angry at Karen for wasting time and money. Others simply turned away, tired of her endless fight. One evening, the HOA held another small meeting, this time not called by Karen. Instead, Martin addressed the group. "This has gone too far," Martin said. "We must face the truth. Karen's actions are not about harmony or peace. They are about control, and that is not what we stand for." Linda added, "We cannot stop her from filing complaints outside, but we can show that the community does not support her behavior. We should make it clear where we stand." The neighbors agreed. A letter was drafted, signed by dozens of residents and delivered to the county office. The letter explained that the community supported David, that the complaints were not shared by the majority, and that his gatherings were respectful and peaceful. When David received a copy of that letter, he felt a warmth spread through him. It was no longer only his battle. The people who had once remained silent now stood beside him. Karen, however, did not take the news well. She grew more distant, more bitter. She rarely greeted neighbors anymore. Her car often sat idle, curtains drawn across her windows. The power she once carried had slipped through her fingers. But one final confrontation still waited. It came on a bright Saturday afternoon. David had invited several families to the lake for a summer picnic. The air was filled with music. Children played on the dock, and the smell of grilled food drifted across the water. Laughter rose and fell like waves. In the middle of the gathering, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Enough." Karen stood at the edge of the lawn, her face tight, her fists clenched. Everyone turned to look at her. David stepped forward calmly. "Karen, you are welcome to join if you wish to enjoy the day." "I will not join," she snapped. "You think you won, but this is not over. You have turned everyone against me. You have embarrassed me in front of the board, in front of officials, in front of my own neighbors. This lake will always be a problem." David shook his head gently. "Karen, the only problem here is the fight you keep holding inside yourself. This land is mine. The lake is mine. That truth will not change no matter how many complaints you make." Karen's eyes flicked across the crowd. Dozens of neighbors stood behind David now, watching silently. Some crossed their arms, others held their children close. None moved to support her. Sam's voice rose from the back. "Enough, Karen. You have tried every way to take what does not belong to you. Let it go. We are tired." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. One woman added, We came here today to enjoy the lake, not to listen to more anger. Another man said firmly, "This community chose peace. If you cannot accept that, then perhaps you should step back." Karen's face trembled with frustration. For the first time, she looked not powerful but small. Her eyes darted around, searching for support, but none came. The silence of rejection pressed against her more heavily than any argument. David stepped closer, his voice calm and steady. "Karen, this fight has cost you much. It has cost peace, friendship, and trust. But it has not cost me my land, because that cannot be taken. It is time to stop." For a moment, Karen stood frozen, her lips parted as if to speak. Then slowly she turned and walked away. Her steps were heavy, her head low. The crowd remained silent until she disappeared beyond the trees. When she was gone, a wave of relief spread through the group. Children returned to play, laughter rose again, and neighbors gathered around David. "You stood strong," one said. "You gave us courage," said another. Sam clapped David on the shoulder. "You never shouted, you never broke, and that made all the difference." David smiled softly. Truth is not always loud, but it is always firm. The sun lowered across the sky, painting the lake with gold. Families stayed until evening, sharing stories and food, building bonds stronger than before. The water shimmered, carrying the echoes of joy across its surface. That night, when all had gone home, David sat alone on the dock. The moonlight danced on the waves. He thought of the long struggle, the endless attempts, the battles fought with words, papers, and patience. It had been tiring, but it had also shown him something important. Strength was not only in holding land. Strength was in holding truth and standing calm against storms, and in choosing peace even when facing anger. He looked across the still water and whispered, "This lake is more than mine. It is a reminder that what is right cannot be shaken." From that day forward, life at the lake grew calmer. Karen kept to herself, her voice no longer carrying power over others. The community found balance again, and David's gatherings continued without fear. Children grew with memories of summer days by the water, and neighbors found comfort in unity. And though the battles had tested him, David carried no bitterness. He carried only the quiet pride of a man who had defended what was his, not with force but with steady truth. The lake remained a symbol of home, of peace, and of a stand that could not be broken.